Wow. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Tim Davey. By day, I'm CEO of BBC Worldwide, but tonight I've got the great honour of interviewing our wonderful guests. Firstly, just thank you and welcome to everyone here tonight. It's great to be here at the Institute of Engineering and Technology. And this is the fourth in a series of very special evenings that we put together with the IET and the Royal Television Society. We had an idea to really get the finest minds and bring together those people who come from a science and technology background, but also have a huge influence on the media, and we can learn in terms of storytelling a lot from them. We've had some amazing people over the last few years, people at the very cutting edge. We focused on areas that seem to be more of the future than the past, areas that not only thrill us, but present chewy questions about the future of us and our planet, as well as how the media can even begin to explain and excite people about what lies ahead. And everyone we've had, having had the privilege of doing this, seems to be curiously ahead of their time. We had Mike Lynch quite a few years ago talking about data privacy and cybersecurity. We had the formidable, huge-brained Demis Hassabis of DeepMind, who was telling us that he was inventing a computer that could beat the world champion at Go. Remember that? A few of you were here for that. Well, the breaking news today is that his original computer, of course, trashed the poor victim, the world champion of Go, quite comprehensively. But his latest edition has just beaten the one that beat the world champion 100-0 in, I think, something like 1,000th of the time. The third person we had was Paul Nurse on genetics and that wonderful and interesting area of future medicine and the complex ethical and scientific dilemmas that presents. But come on, now, tonight, we're at the biggest topic of all, the final frontier. And we have one guest in our midst before I introduce Tim, who I just want to thank, actually, and that's Teresa, who's the CEO of the Royal Television Society, because when she came up with the idea and said, maybe we can get this person. And I said, that would be rather wonderful. And she did it, not me. So it is an honour tonight to be joined by a bit of a hero in the room. Not just because of what he did, but how he did it. Tim Peake, the British Army officer with over 3,000 hours of flying experience and a distinguished military career, who became the first British ESA astronaut, seeing off over 9,000 applicants to get one of those 6 places. And through his passion, expertise, and sheer goodness of heart, has set a new bar on how to engage people in space exploration. One stat, 1.6 million pupils in the UK got actively involved and engaged with the mission. It was beyond the wildest dreams of those setting the targets. And that's just the UK alone. So it's an incredible privilege for me, very exciting for all of us, I'm sure, to introduce Tim Peake. Fantastic. Well, we're going to chat for about 30 minutes max, but then I'm going to obviously hand over to you guys. So start thinking about your questions now. Let's just start off with you. And that mission, obviously, one of the things we got obsessed by was just the physical toll it was taking. So I think one of the questions everyone wants to ask you now is, obviously, those first 3 days were pretty rough. I think it was a hangover from hell, you described it. But how's your bone density? How's it going?
How am I? Well, I'm alive. That's one good thing. 4:30, good evening. It's great to see everybody tonight. And thank you very much for coming. I'm delighted to be here. But yes, so what's it like coming back? The first 3 days, I described it as the world's worst hangover. And that is very true. There's no other feeling that I can relate to. And that is all to do with your vestibular system. It's completely messed up. It's not so much to the balance. You get your balance back quite quickly, but just that feeling of nausea and dizziness every time you stand, every time you move your head, all you want to do is sit in a chair and keep your head still. Right. But those problems, you can deal with, and they get better reasonably quickly. What takes a lot longer, of course, is the bone density to recover, the muscle mass. And it's not just the muscle mass. I launched at 70 kilograms, and I came back just a fraction under 70 kilograms because we work out up there. We have to exercise 2.5 hours a day. But you kind of redistribute your muscle mass differently because you're working the major muscle groups, but you're not working your small stabilizing muscles. You're not doing much core strength. It's very hard to do exercises up there with core strength. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, it's quite shocking. You've got this kind of strangely shaped body with the worked out muscle groups, but in between there's nothing. It's just really sort of like blocking. And it probably took about 6 months for me to feel like
you're in Cologne, you're back in Cologne. You're helping, obviously, some that are going up soon. But in terms of Project Peake, are they looking at you daily? I mean, are you being tracked? I mean, how's that working? Are you getting...
So for the first 6 months, it's quite intense. They are looking at you daily for the first 3 weeks. And then after that, it's probably 2 or 3 times a month you're having tests and various bits of scientific data taken. That continues for 6 months. And then it's every 6 monthly intervals. So over the summer, I had my R+1, we call it the 1 year from landing medical checks. And my bone density had pretty much recovered. I've got a very small fraction of bone density around the femoral area to recover, but otherwise everything is pretty good.
I've never heard that problem before, but that's fantastic.
The femoral neck is the one that gets the most impact from microgravity, interestingly enough. It's the one that we find very hard to keep in good shape. So, but other than that, the body has recovered remarkably well.
Important to hear. Yeah. And looking back on, obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the media coverage and from a presentational point of view, but from a personal point of view, that mission, I mean, you've talked a number of times in various places about it, but reflecting now with a bit of time on the enormity of what you went through, what memories do you hold and say, it was all special, but that was a moment, that was, I'll never forget that?
If I had to say one moment, it's very clear to me, and that's during the spacewalk when Tim Coper and I were at the furthest edge of the space station.
I've got to thank you for making the name Tim cool again, by the way. I mean, 2 Tims on a spacewalk. It's like this is fantastic. But yeah. Anyway.
There was the moment where we had got out there early to the work site. The first task we had to do, the main objective of the spacewalk was to repair this SSU, sequential shunt unit, which is a bit like a circuit breaker box, really. Right. Because the circuit breaker box had failed, we just had live electricity coming straight from the sun to the solar panel straight into the space station. We needed to replace this unit, but we couldn't touch it until the sun went down, obviously, because otherwise we were in risk of electric shock. And having got out there early, Mission Control said, guys, 10 minutes, hang out and watch the sun go down. And that was
Did you just explain that a bit? Because were you just hanging there with the whatever you... Sorry, it's not going to be... My technical description is not great, but the leash or whatever you've got on, and you were just watching our planet drift underneath you. I mean...
We really were. And for me, I mean, that was the first thing I'd done on my spacewalk. I'd got out and I was just working so intently, getting out there safely. I was carrying the new unit.
Because you had to go about 50 metres, if I remember, or something. Is that right?
Yes, about 50 metres out to the very furthest edge of the truss. Yeah. And it's quite a difficult... It's a bit like rock climbing. You study and analyse the route out there, and it was quite difficult getting all the way out there past a number of different obstacles obstacles, some really big arm reaches. You have to go past this very big joint, which is called the alpha rotary joint. The whole solar panels rotate 360 degrees. So you have to cross over that joint, which is very, very tricky.
What was different to try? Because you guys are trained to an inch of your lives. I mean, you'd been down in caves, you'd been living underwater. I mean, what was the experience? What was different about the actual experience that all that training could really?
I think the additional level of exposure you feel. I mean, in some of the training with the caving and with Nemo, 12 days underwater, we were exposed to real risk there. But the level of risk you feel out on a spacewalk is much, much greater. You are completely at the mercy of your equipment functioning correctly.
We've got a little bit of video, one that the BBC happened to put out. Shameless. But this is a little bit of the highlight, because it does bring it to everyone in a lovely way. Look at this. Here we go.
A moment of exploration history as Tim Peake prepares to venture outside the space station. Weightless but jammed into a bulky spacesuit, he needs his colleagues to guide him into the airlock. We hear him go through his final checks. There have been plenty of spacewalks before, but they're always hazardous, and at about 1 o'clock it was time to float out. It was dark when he emerged, a tiny figure against the vast space station.
Tim, it's really cool seeing that Union Jack go outside, since it's explored all over the world. Now it's explored space.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be wearing it. Huge privilege. A proud moment.
Hand by hand, Tim Peake and a fellow astronaut inched along outside. Filmed by his American colleague, Tim Peake is perched at the very edge of the space station, in position to help carry out a key repair job. But look how hard it is managing tools in space. This is the view from Tim Peake's own camera. Everything is weightless and wants to float away. Stepping outside the International Space Station is always risky, but spacewalks are essential to build and fix things. Now, the astronauts emerge through an airlock here, and if we take a closer look, we can see how they had to make their way about 60 metres to replace what's called a sequential shunt unit. That's part of the power supply connecting the solar panels. So how do they stay safe while they're out there? Well, their spacesuits have 14 layers of material to give protection from the vacuum of space and from temperatures ranging from minus 100 Celsius right up to plus 120. Backpacks contain oxygen, a power supply and water for life support. And in case the astronauts drift away, small thruster jets can maneuver them back to safety. The main task was to replace that power unit. They had to get it done within 31 minutes. Because that's how long night lasts on the space station, and if sunlight hit the solar panels, they could have been electrocuted. In the event, all went well. Then, a problem. Water was found in the helmet of Tim Peake's companion, Tim Copra. They were ordered back inside. A syringe was used to collect samples of the water. This matters because 3 years ago, an astronaut nearly drowned in his spacesuit. This time, no harm was done, and the main repair task was completed. But there'll be questions about what went wrong, and all of this is a reminder of the dangers of working in space. David Shuckman, BBC News.
There you go. Did you ever find out? I've never, in all the things I've read, I've never known. Did he find out what the water was in
No,
Copra's
not
mouth?
really. Not with Tim Copra's
No,
suit.
in Copra's
With
suit, yeah.
Luca Parmitano's, which was being referred to there back
Yeah.
in 2013 when he did his spacewalk. It was very obviously a fan pump separator that failed.
Right.
And so all of the water that we carry in our space, we use water for cooling as well as for drinking, but this water was for the cooling system, was being injected through the ventilation system over the top of his head.
Right.
And Luca's bald, so he felt it quite quickly. He suddenly felt his head go very cold and mentioned it. And of course, that water built up quite rapidly and became a very serious problem.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move on a little bit to and this is a good link in terms of the coverage and the excitement that happened on the mission. How early in the process, through that selection and everything, did you really think, I want to do more than just turn up, I want to engage people? It was so profound. Where did it come from?
Do you know, I mean, really, it came right back from 2009 when I was selected as an astronaut. It was a huge deal back then. You know, that when I was selected in 2009, the UK was not participating in the human spaceflight program. So I was as surprised as anybody. I remember at the conference when we were announced and Jonathan Amos was there, and he turned to Jean-Jacques Dordain and said, "Why have you chosen a British astronaut?" You know, we were all surprised. I was surprised. So right back then, I knew this was a fantastic opportunity. There was no guarantee of a flight. At that time, we had 5 flights. There were 6 astronauts, so I knew which one was bottom of the list.
It's a terrible TV reality format.
Exactly,
like,
exactly.
Yeah.
But we started working towards it. We were very active in the UK. At the time, the UK Space Agency was just being formed, and we galvanised the microgravity environment, and we spoke to politicians. So right back then, it was really the road to another UK mission. It had been over 20 years since Helen Sharman had first flown to the Mir space station. So when I was assigned back in May 2013, I knew that this was an incredible opportunity and one that just had to be grasped. And we started right then to plan the mission with all of these programs.
In terms of the communication, it reminds me a little bit in my world of David Attenborough and the wonders that he communicates, often complex issues, never patronising, but in a way that people can understand. How much thinking, is that natural for you? Or, I mean, I know if you look on the web, you'll see you doing kind of school lessons and things with Brian Cox style, inflatable globes and this, that and the other. Was that just natural? Because it's an amazing gift to be able to communicate in that way.
I think I have to make things simple for myself. So when somebody gives me a complex subject, I need to study it, I need to break it down, and I need to understand how it works and why it works, and then build it back up again. And that's just how I go about all the topics, whether we're talking about helicopter systems or whether we're talking about life support on the International Space Station. And so I just think it's the way that my mind works, and so I find that if I try and explain it as to how I understand things, that seems to come across how other people can easily understand things as well.
And you're right, I mean, there was so many things going on that, whether it's the Brit Awards and running a marathon. I was boasting that I was on the ground, doing the tarmac, but there was a man on the treadmill in this amazing contraption that you were running in. Was that all planned? Obviously it's planned beforehand rigorously, but did you add to it yourself? Did you think you wanted to do more or less? Because I deal with a lot of talent who would see all that publicity stuff as a distraction, but you seem to revel in it.
We planned it out before the mission, and again, it comes back to trying to maximise the opportunity. The educational programs were the main focus, and we had no idea how successful this mission was going to be and how much people were really going to embrace it. So back then we had about 30 programs, and we thought, well, if only 50% of these take off and get some interest, we'll consider it a success. We had no idea that it was going to be so successful. So these events such as, I was up there for the Six Nations, I was up there for the London Marathon. I thought, well, it would be great to run a marathon when you're on board the space station. The Brit Awards was one that came along a little bit later. That wasn't planned so far in advance. But the funny thing was, when it came to packing my bag for all of these things, I had to pack the bag about 18 months before launch. So, you imagine when you go on vacation.
Why is it 18 months? Why is it 18 months before? Is it just you have to be that organised?
We have the crew bag that you get allocated goes up on a resupply vehicle about 18 months before your mission. Everything is very carefully structured. So it's already up there on the space station waiting for you. And of course, it has to be manifested. It has to go over to either Russia or it goes to the USA, depending on which vehicle it's like, or over to Japan. Some of them go up on the HTV. So that process takes an awful long time between you packing your bag, it actually sitting on a rocket, and then arriving on the space station. So I had to be very, very organised in what I decided to do and what I took. And that's why we went through all of this forward planning. But the Tux T-shirt in there was quite a funny one, because I had no idea what I was going to use that for. But I just thought
maybe
I'm
a Tux T-shirt.
A British astronaut on board the space station. I ought to have a tuxedo, and I'm I'm sure there'll be an opportunity at some point to wear it. And
the Bond movies came into too right. Yeah, no, it's good. And your reflections for there's a lot of media in the room, and your reflection on coming back and seeing the effect of it all. What do you say? Okay, we need to do more of that. That's the stuff that really worked. What's and we talked about the highlight of the mission itself, but in terms of the engagement, the effects, what were the things you look at and say, I'm really proud of that and we need to do more of it?
I mean, the engagement was phenomenal. I was quite isolated from it up there, as you would expect.
Totally,
not kidding, 400 kilometres up, orbiting the Earth. But I really wasn't aware all the time of the impact it was having. My team on the ground would send me emails and kind of, okay, this is going well and what have you. But that wasn't the focus of the mission. We were just busy, all day long working on the space station, working on our programs. So a lot of these things didn't become truly apparent to me until I landed. And then people were kind of filling me in on what had gone on in the mission. And I was realizing then, oh, wow, that did have a big impact. One of the things that I think was brilliant and we did really well was the cosmic classroom. And that one lesson hit over 500,000 school children. And that was just really such a simple concept between Kevin Fong and myself. He'd be on the ground, I'd be up in space. Yeah. We'd have a video link and we'll do a classroom.
It's a formidable double act. No, I've watched it.
And then all the schools around the UK that want to dial in can just dial in and watch on the web. So it was wonderful and it worked really, really well.
Oh, amazing. Let's look a little bit to the future. We've obviously got all these largely American billionaires coming into the game now. Mars is capturing the imagination in fictional storytelling, if not the real world. If you look ahead now and say, okay, the next 10 years, what's in your head in terms of what's achievable? What are we going to see?
Next 10 years is going to be really exciting because we're already building the components that are going to take us beyond the International Space Station. The ISS has had a life extension out to 2024, and it will probably be up there for longer than that. But we know from 2024 onwards, we're probably going to be handing over the space station to commercial companies. And in fact, there's several commercial companies, including Axiom and Bigelow's already.
Is that what happens before it kind of crashes down finally into the middle of the Pacific? Or
absolutely, yeah. In fact, the current plan is for Axiom is to have 2 modules bolt onto the space station to use the space station to get them up and running. So using space station life support resources. Right. Yeah. And then when it comes to the space station being decommissioned, actually just undocking the Axiom space station and that remaining in orbit, the rest of the space station comes down.
Will that be a space station?
A space station, and Bigelow has the same concept. He already has a module attached to the space station that he's testing out. Right. So there's 2 commercial companies that are very interested in low Earth orbit and the commercialization of low Earth orbit and how we can use that for our science research. But what that enables the space agencies to do is to now focus their resources on the next step, which is the moon, and then from the moon onto Mars. So we're already. So when you say the moon,
I mean, what exactly does that? I mean, I'm not being facetious because we need to get there, but we talk about settling, permanent settlements, all of that stuff. I mean, what's real? In our children's next phase of their lives, what are they going to see?
Well, it's no surprise that it changes depending on certain administrations around the world. Yeah. And NASA clearly being one of the leaders in giving us the direction in which they're going affects the direction that other international agencies follow. That's not to say the European Space Agency and Roscosmos and the Japanese, the Canadians can't go and have their own direction, but in terms of global exploration strategy, if you like, NASA is clearly a very big driver. And under the Obama years, it was the asteroid redirect mission, which never really gathered any momentum, and people really didn't get behind it because everyone was really focused on what they wanted to do as the lunar exploration mission. Now that started in Bush's administration with the Constellation program, and now Trump has recently announced that yes, NASA is firmly back online to go to the moon. But in the meantime, what has been being developed is the rocket that's going to enable us to get the hardware there, the SLS launcher, and also the components for what's called a deep space gateway. Now the deep space gateway will actually be in a cislunar orbit, and that will have a propulsion unit to it, which means that it can adjust its orbit around the moon so it can suit lunar surface operations,
Right.
but it can also put itself into an orbit that suits Mars transportation. So building a deep space transportation system that can use the Deep Space Gateway, deep space transportation onto Mars. So it's these stepping stones
And that is
we
10
have.
years, is it? Or 20? I mean,
So the Deep Space Gateway is a 10-year plan, absolutely. So by 2027, 2028, the Deep Space Gateway should be fully constructed.
and that, I mean, I've got to ask, because it is in everyone's mind, the leap to Mars, you think is...
The leap to Mars will be
gonna
the
happen.
following 10 years after
The following
that.
10
Yes,
years.
I would say from
Okay.
2027
I've got my
to
map now,
37. Yes,
Yeah.
and I think that's realistic time scales. I mean, everybody says, add 10 years to what you think, but the SLS rocket is flying in 2019, maybe 2020. It's being built right now. So are the components of the Deep Space Gateway. These aren't just sort of PowerPoint slides. We're pressing metal in the factories.
In terms of the stories for the media, I mean, it's a bit of a broad question, but when you look at all the things that you so wonderfully achieved in the mission, where do you see, if you talk to the media leaders here and say these are great stories to be told and engaging imagination of children around the UK and the world, where do you see these where do you look to for future stories for us? Is it this kind of the next frontier in Mars, or are there other things stories we should be telling?
I think it is. I mean, in terms of exploration, we have the robotic and human exploration always, run in parallel, and robotics is fantastic because they're kind of the precursor missions for where human exploration is going to follow. And it really builds on our innate human desire to explore and to push the boundaries of technology and to push the boundaries of the unknown. So that's definitely where the focus needs to be. And we have Curiosity on Mars, currently searching for signs of life. We've got the ExoMars mission, which will be launching in 2020, putting a European lander on the surface of Mars. And I think we're very close to finding an awful lot about Mars and perhaps signs of past microbial life forms even. If not, then certainly...
Is that an announcement, Tim?
Well,
yeah.
where there's water and where there has been water, and Mars had a very active atmosphere. It had enough water or there is enough water on Mars to cover the whole planet in 35 meters depth of ocean. Wow. Now, there's that much water. There has to have been, at some point in its history, the potential for life to form.
Fascinating. And then let's talk a little bit about you. What's the plan for you over the next few years?
So the next few years, myself and when I talk about me, I'd also talk about my colleagues, my shenanigans class of 2009. There were 6 of us who were selected back then. Since then, 1 extra has joined us, Matthias from Germany, so we're now a class of 7. And with the space station going on till 2024, we all have the opportunity for another mission. So Alex Gers from Germany, he's got his second mission in May next year. He launches in May. Luca Parmitano from Italy will be after him, and then the rest of us will fall in line. So there's definitely the opportunity for a second mission between now and 2024, unknown timescale.
And you're itching to get back, are you?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I've not spoken to any astronaut who's not interested in going back into space, and not just for the weightlessness and the viewing of the planet, but the missions on the space station are constantly evolving. It's a really fascinating place. And as soon as I was coming back from the mission, for example, Kate Rubins, she came on board just after me and was starting DNA sequencing on board. And then this year we've started flame combustion techniques that we've never done before. So there's always incredibly interesting scientific programs that are being developed for the space station.
I'm going to hand to the audience after one more question, so get yourselves ready. But the final question is you've been a beneficiary of a publicly funded program. We've got private. We talked about these very wealthy individuals kind of pushing the frontiers. There's lots of debates in that area. How do you see the future developing between those two ecosystems, for want of a better word?
I really do see them going hand in hand on many different levels. I'm just spoken there about the commercialization and the handing over of low Earth orbit to the commercial sector, if you like, and the ability to free up resources for the National Space Agency to go into deeper exploration. And we'll have other companies like Virgin Galactic and Xcore that will be offering, space tourism, a trip to space.
And this is all good news, is it?
It's all good news because what it's doing is they're operating in an incredibly challenging environment. They're pushing technology to the absolute limit. And they're bringing down the cost of access to space. Now, yes, it's a sport for the rich at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt. They're expensive tickets. But then aviation back in the early 1900s, crossing the Atlantic, was a sport for the rich as well. But by doing it, by starting somewhere, what you do is you develop the technologies and the capabilities to be able to reduce the cost of access to space. And at some point along the road, it will become affordable for the ordinary person. Now, in terms of deeper space exploration, what's really interesting is I mentioned about going for the moon and the Mars. Now, and working in a partnership, no one space agency can do these missions by themselves. We have to work as a partnership. And what's interesting now is the mix of public-private, because the private sector is racing ahead. I mean, the things that Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX and the technologies he's developing are phenomenal. For example, the Raptor engine that he's planning on using for a deep space transportation system. So I see the future as not just an international partnership of the national space agencies.
And the UK will have a role in this, you think?
Completely, yes, yeah. I mean, the UK...
Because as a proud Brit, it brings tears to my eyes. That lovely bit when you were talking about the Union Jack on you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you are ferociously proud of it all.
Yes.
That's an essential part going forward, is it, as well, you think, for us as a nation in terms of being part of this
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the capabilities and the technologies we have in the UK are fundamental to the exploration programme. UK is a huge member state within ESA, the fourth largest within ESA, and we're actually building components now that are on the space station that will be involved in the Deep Space Gateway as well. And I mentioned the ExoMars mission. Well, the ExoMars rover is the lead developer for that. The lead builder is Airbus in UK down at the Stevenage yards. So we're already involved in these programs, in these exploration programs, heavily involved.
Brilliant. Why don't I hand over to you guys? Not big introductions, just name if you want to say where. If you're interested in saying where you come from, that's fine. And a question, please, would be nice, as opposed to a long statement. But we'll start with this young gentleman at the front. What's your name, sir?
My name is Barnaby.
Hi, Barnaby. Do you want to ask Tim a question?
So my name is Barnaby Miller-Jones.
Hi, Barnaby.
Hello, Tim Peake.
Hi there.
So my question for you is, what is it like in zero gravity and how do you cope?
What is it like and how do you cope? Gosh, the hardest questions always come from the younger ones. Barnaby,
thanks for that.
That is a great question. It's very difficult to describe what zero gravity is like. I mean, if you imagine now that we were weightless, this room would be scary, and the reason it would be scary is it's so big. We would be floating, and yet there are no handholds, and loads of us would get stuck in the middle of the room, just flapping arms and legs, thinking, can somebody put me on a wall, please, where I can grab onto something. You have to completely readjust your whole way of seeing things. But the great side, the plus side, is we're all sitting in this tiny volume here. Imagine if we could use the volume of this room. Wow, we could have storage units, we could have extra seating, have 4 layers, we could do so much more. And that's what we do on the space station. So we can use a huge amount of the volume in the space station just because we can flip ourselves around and work in zero gravity. But it does take a while to get used to. And in the first few days on the space station, it's not uncommon for astronauts to get a little bit lost and disoriented. You come out of a module and everything's upside down and you just kind of have to spend a few seconds reorientating your mind. But what's amazing about the human brain is how quickly it adapts to that. And before long, your brain can just flip things. And it's very easy for you to be able to work upside down or the right way up, and there is no upside down in space. So you end up coping quite well after just a short period of time. But great question.
Great question.
I would love to. Yes, Barnaby, absolutely.
We'll go over there. That's great. Thank you.
Hi there, Tim. Ed Scott from Shameless here.
Hi, Ed.
I saw you as the New Scientist Live last year, and when you finished, there were hundreds of people around you. Everybody wanted to photograph and autograph and shake your hand. How does it feel to be a rock star?
It feels very unusual, and it still feels very surreal, and I certainly don't consider myself that at all. I think something that's really helped me cope very well with it is not living in the UK, which, I love the UK, and at some point I really want to get back here and live here. But for the last 4 years, I've been living in Houston because so much of my training and my mission was out there. And now I'm working back at the European Astronaut Centre in Cologne in Germany. So there I can lead a completely normal life of anonymity. And then I land at Heathrow and suddenly it's selfie time. And I kind of have to, I just put my game face on and think, okay, here we are, I'm back in the UK.
One of the phenomena that people are talking about actually is that people are much more interested in meeting people who've experienced things without meeting someone who's just an expert. And I don't want to criticise professors of, astronomy or whatever, but people that want to see, get hold of, touch, talk to people who've experienced things. Have you felt that? I mean, have you seen? I mean, some of the BBC are saying when we get guests on shows, there's less appetite now, and I don't know whether this is good news or bad news. There's less appetite from the listener for someone who can talk about something theoretically, much more about people who've experienced things. Are you feeling that? In terms
of hugely, because I mean that's the great side. I mean the downside is the attention. I have to get used to that and the request for selfies and things. But the plus side is how positive everyone has been, and most people who come up, they want to ask me something. It's a case of, hey, how did you feel doing this, or what was it like on the rocket ride, or coming back to Earth? And,
do you ever get bored with answering the question?
I don't, because I've spoken to so many of my astronaut
you've
friends.
sold a few times.
I have, but we're all very passionate about what we do. We love space, we love the environment, and that spacewalk was the most incredible 5 hours of my life. So I'll never get bored of talking about it. Yeah.
Great. Sorry, am I causing the mic people stress by that one in the middle? And then we'll go over there. Sorry, I'll start teeing them up next. I think was a question over there? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Hi, team. My name is G from Plum Innovations. My question is, what is the most asked questions?
What's the most asked question?
For you, yeah.
It really depends on the audience, because when it's the schools, it's how do you go to the loo, and is the most usual question. Obviously, with a more adult audience, then it's kind of things such as how did your body adapt to weightlessness, those kind of questions. But no, it completely depends on the age of the audience. I'm always terrified about the younger questions, though, because you never know what you're going to get. That was a good one, though, Barnaby, but you never know.
Now, if ever there's an invitation for the under 16 in the room to put their hand up, that was it, right? One over there.
Hi, my name is Jerome. I study aeronautical engineering. And historically, pilots used to be more from, astronauts used to be more from a military pilot background like yourself. But we've seen more and more scientists, like biologists and stuff like that. So how do you think this will evolve in the future? And also, what do you think were the advantages of having a pilot experience in space when you were there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and you are quite right. You look back to the early Apollo, Gemini, Mercury days, and the Russian space program. It was kind of the alpha male, fast jet test pilot community that were all going into those jobs. Now it's completely different, and also gender as well. It's great to see NASA's previous selection was bang on 50% female male, and that's absolutely the direction we need to be going in. The things that are more important these days in terms of astronaut selection is shifting from those kind of test pilot qualifications and requirements to the softer skills in terms of communication, decision-making, leadership, followership for longer duration missions. And 6 months is now considered the norm. Well, it was only a few years ago that 6 months was a really long stay in space. When I was up there, Scott Kelly and Misha Kornienko were up there for a year. And that's going to, it's when we start doing the Mars missions, people are going to be saying, 1 year, was that it? I've been up there for 3 years. This is the direction we're going in. So as we shift our mission objectives and our strategy, we are shifting our selection criteria as well in the terms of the kind of people we're selecting. I don't think it matters so much in terms of whether you're a pilot, a scientist, an engineer. We'll still need a breadth of different skill sets. But it's the sort of
Have you got to commit to 3 years now? Sorry, commit to 3 years now if you sign up. I.e., you've got to be available to go up there for the longer mission if you sign someone up now.
Yeah, when the European Space Agency has its next selection process, it will be expecting a long-term commitment from that individual. Yes, because the missions are so long. In terms of the second part of your question, is the piloting skills. I think that piloting skills really have helped me enormously in terms of things such as communication. We get very used to the set way of communicating, obviously in a cockpit, and especially a tandem seat cockpit where you can't actually see the person you're talking to very well. And a lot of those flying skills, or the hard skills, are used in space as well. I mean, using the robotic arm there, operating that, so similar to flying a helicopter. So I felt I had a huge advantage. I just got on those controls and was like, okay, this is great. I can drive that arm around, no problem at all. So there are definitely skills you bring in.
Brilliant.
Matt Hancock, I'm the Minister for Digital, and I'm interested in how you can use your communication skills to explain why this is a valuable thing to do. So most people in this room probably intrinsically think it's valuable, and I certainly do. But can you articulate why, from the scientific point of view, a lay person should expect their governments to put money into these sorts of missions and the Mars missions and what comes beyond?
Yes, well, again, it very much depends on the audience that I'm talking to in terms of how I would address that. From a purely economical point of view, you could say, well, you get a 1.8 return on your investment. Who wouldn't invest when they're promised a 1.8 return? You get a 2 times return on your employment in terms of the space sector and the investment. That's within the European Space Agency in the exploration program, so for the ISS program. So just on pure statistical terms, it's a good investment. In terms of the technology transfer that we then have back into the other sectors of the community is obviously huge as well. And then there's the research, the pure research that's going on board the space station. Research such as the pharmaceuticals that we're developing, drugs for osteoporosis, we're looking into diabetes, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, muscular dystrophy. The pharmaceutical industry and the medical community are suddenly realizing that microgravity is an incredibly valuable area to do research. One of the biggest reasons for that, you have to kind of dig down into quite deep to get there, is because we can grow crystals very purely and very pure and large crystals in microgravity because there's no convection, there's no sedimentation, and protein crystals are very important for drug development. So by growing very large, very pure protein crystals in space, we can subsequently manage to manufacture drugs that can combat those diseases. So again, in terms of the benefits of space, there are many, many benefits, whether it's economic, whether it's science, or I might just say, well, the taxpayer that might completely go over your heads. But if your kids come back from school and say, Daddy, I spoke to an astronaut today on board the space station, that is very hard to quantify the effect that has on a community and on our younger generation and on the inspiration that it gives them and the subsequent careers that they then might follow because they see the opportunities are available to them. That's the harder one to quantify because we don't have the statistics to say, it's like the Apollo effect back in the USA. We don't really have the statistics to say what that did.
I've heard many pitches to government for money, but that's as good as it gets. Just here.
Hello, my name's Deborah. I'm speaking on behalf of my 5-year-old nephew who can't be here tonight because, unfortunately, his mother's not very well, so they couldn't come down from Manchester. So I'm asking his question, which is, why should I be an astronaut? He wants to be an astronaut, he loves it, and I can't convince him otherwise. He wants to know why he should be an astronaut and if he should continue to think about being an astronaut as he grows older and starts thinking about what decisions he needs to make in terms of education.
Yes, well, I mean, why he wants to be an astronaut, he'll know exactly why he wants to be an astronaut, so he doesn't need me to tell him why. But I think everybody has their own slightly different reasons. My reasons were perhaps different to some of my colleagues. I came to the role of an astronaut from a very technical background as a military test pilot. And so that was my driving passion. I saw an astronaut's job as the pinnacle of being a test pilot. We're pushing technology to its absolute limits. That was fascinating, evaluating pieces of equipment that are going to take us out into space further. Some of my other colleagues came from a more scientific background, and some of them had just wanted to be an astronaut since the age of 4, and that was exactly what they were going to do. So everybody has a slightly different reason. And I'm sure your nephew has got his own reasons as to why he wants to do it.
I think we've got one up the back.
Yep, hi. My name's Ram. I'm an aeronautics student. Just want to ask, you were mentioning about the future plans for space travel. So for the next 10 years, we'll be going to the moon, and 10 years after that, it'll be Mars. What about after that, after 20 years, even further into the future?
Okay, so if we think we've got some challenges with getting to Mars, then beyond Mars, we've really got some challenges. Some of the obvious challenges we have in terms of getting to Mars is our journey time. We know we need new novel propulsion techniques in order to cut that transit time down from 8 months as it currently is. We need to get that down to a matter of just weeks to get to Mars and back. We need to be able to shield our astronauts from the radiation exposure they're going to get from galactic cosmic rays and outside the Earth's magnetosphere. And we need to be able to provide a habitat for living on Mars as well. Beyond Mars, then, the kind of propulsion techniques that we need to have and the ability for humans to be able to live in space for really extended periods of time, that's going to be the main challenge. But by the time we get there, who knows, maybe we have colonies on Mars, and maybe we have people who are living on Mars permanently.
Does your gut tell you that's going to happen?
It tells me it's going to happen. It tells me we are talking, a long time in the future. Period. We know that things.
Because when you watch Star Wars, didn't you watch Star Wars on the space station?
Yeah,
Are you looking at going, that's quite a way yet?
Yeah, it is, but it's going to happen, and things do take a lot of time, and obviously it takes cooperation, it takes resourcing, and it takes funding. So there's a reason why it takes a long time, but we will get there. These technological problems are not insurmountable.
Gentleman in the middle there.
Dave Bancroft, I wondered if there is something else besides weight that disappears on the space station, and that's this thing that people down below care a lot about, which is nationality. Do you all become just Earth citizens up there?
Yeah, it's a great question. You do. You actually, I think you become Earth citizens before you leave, because you spend so much training with your colleagues that you just forget that you're with a Japanese or a Canadian or a French or a Russian or American. We're just one core of astronauts. But that's certainly the case on board the space station. There's absolutely no other way to live and work on board a space station with 6 people unless you're completely on the same side. You absolutely entrust your life to the other people. When we had our docking failure and the Soyuz spacecraft sent itself out automatically 90 meters back into the blackness of space, and Yuri had to take manual control, there was very little that Tim Coper and myself could do to assist Yuri. He's the only one with his hands on the controls. We could give him rate information, distance information, we could try and talk him into the docking cone, but he was the one flying the spacecraft. Now, that nearly went wrong, and thankfully, on the second attempt, it was an absolute textbook docking. But you really do put your life in other people's hands, and for that reason, we are just one core of astronauts.
Do you feel that, I want to quickly... do you feel the need to be a campaigner in that at all, or is it just... I know we had that lovely image of the Earth's atmosphere just being a layer of paper.
Yes, yeah.
And so thin. It's a bit like some of the natural history stuff. You get drawn into the future of the oceans, the future of the planet, environmental issues. Do you feel sucked into that more political area?
Yeah, you do, but it does come very naturally. And the funny thing is that a lot of the people that we're sending up into the space station aren't people that you would necessarily, consider that would have been their priority. We have MiG-29 pilots, 2 Apache pilots,
and yet used a lot of fuel. Yeah.
Exactly, and yet we get up there, and these are when I first joined the army, I was studying Russian hardware as my enemies coming across the North German plain, and then I'm sitting next to Yuri, thinking, well, here's a guy who's flown Russian jets who I would have been against in an Apache, and we're absolute teammates, and we're working for a common problem. So it really does, give you a different perspective on life. But there's no way you can look at Earth from space. There is absolutely no way you can see that and not have an absolutely mind-changing experience as to how we need to look after the planet. It's very apparent. Yeah.
It's right here. On the front row.
Maybe an extension to that kind of previous discussion point, in the current political climate, a lot of political leaders are advancing, whatever nation name first kind of strategy. How would you kind of convince those politicians to basically do what you suggest, which is to cooperate?
I think it really comes in terms of the end objectives. There is no way the space station would have been built if it hadn't been able to have a level of cooperation through, if you consider, the space station turns 20 next year, of all the political tensions there have been between the member states that are involved in the ISS program over the past 20 years. Whilst I was training in Russia before launch, we had the Crimea crisis going on. And people were saying, is Tim Peake still going to launch to space? Of course I was. The space sector is able to sort of transcend these political divides, because each nation knows that the goals, the end objectives, are so important to each nation, and they will only happen with cooperation. So I think once, when you have an objective, when you set an objective and you decide that's what we're buying into, we really need to achieve that, and it's only cooperation that's going to make that work, then that's when things come together.
We've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to spin through some questions. So, this gentleman here.
There's a lady up here who's got a mic before me, apparently.
Oh, okay. Go for it. No? Maybe not.
So it's very quickly. My name's James. Just thank you for tonight. It's been fascinating.
Hi,
thank you very much. When the lights go off and you're on your own, how do you feel? Has the experience changed you to the point that you just feel differently about the world that you live in?
Yes, I think it does. I mean, there's this term that people use, the overview effect, for astronauts who've come back from space, and and I would never compare the overview effect you get from 400 kilometers on the space station to what the Apollo astronauts were experiencing at 400,000 kilometers away from Earth. And I had the pleasure of talking to Al Warden quite a few times about his mission and his spacewalk as well. And actually, the spacewalk he did, because of the trajectory you have on the moon coming back to the Earth, at the time he did his spacewalk, they were on this long trajectory, and he could see the moon there, and he could see Earth there as he was outside the Apollo spacecraft. Now, that kind of overview effect, I'd imagine, is quite different to the one that we experienced. But also, living for 6 months in space, the amount of time you spend contributes to this feeling. And I think it's just a sort of cognitive shift in perspective. I think the fact that you're able to place the Earth, and I feel I know the Earth so well, which is really weird, but I've seen every part of the Earth 16 times a day we orbit, and I really know the terrain, the territory, what places look like, places I've never been to, and some places I never will go to, but I really know what they look like, and I can place everything. And then you look the opposite direction out into space, and you realise just how tiny and fragile planet Earth is. It does leave an impact, yes.
Question like that. A few more questions, then we'll be.
Hi, my name's Abby. I work on ExoMars for Airbus, so thanks for the plug earlier. We've heard a lot about how you've inspired millions of school kids, but you've got 2 young children of your own. I just wondered, they obviously experienced the fact that Daddy was in space, and they've heard all of the stories that you've told them since you've come back. What's their favourite memory? What's their go-to anecdote of Daddy as an astronaut?
Gosh, I think the biggest thing was when I watched Star Wars, as you mentioned, Tim, there, because my boys are so into it as well. Yeah. And I think for them, imagining me on the space station watching one of their favourite movies was something that they...
In the cool dad stakes, it's quite high, I'll give you that.
It's quite high. Yeah. It's something they relate to. But for both of them, actually, in terms of I think what is probably the most powerful memory for them, I think it would be watching the launch. And as we started off this evening, you heard that sound clip that Dallas Campbell from the BBC took. And, my boys were listening to that and watching the rocket go off. And until that moment, they had never, ever experienced anything like that. And I think for them, they always now relate that to, oh, yes, that's when Daddy went to space.
Great.
Hi, my name is Jill. With the training, I would imagine it's incredibly difficult. Is there a point that weeds out lots of astronauts, or where you just thought, I can't go on, I'm not going to be able to make it, but then obviously you did? And also my friend wants to know if you get Netflix in space.
Okay, I'll do the second part first, because that's really quickly. No to the Netflix. Our internet up there is painfully slow. We couldn't possibly video stream at all. Certainly not for our own sort of social benefits. No, in terms of the scientific experiments, yes, they've got huge bandwidth, but they don't let us have that bandwidth for Netflix, unfortunately.
Moment of self-doubt? Yeah. When was the moment in the training you said?
In training, nobody fails the trainer. I think once you're selected for a mission, you're so committed. that you know you're going to pass the training. That's not to say there's some areas that are a real struggle. Some people really struggle with spacewalk training. It's really difficult in that suit. It's really hard work, and some people just haven't got a good build for it.
What was toughest for you then? What was it?
For me, it was Russian. It was learning Russian language, without a shadow of a doubt. I just couldn't get the left side of the brain to work. And
really,
I've got a terrible ear for music and a terrible ear for languages. So I just
What's
had
it
to.
like now? Is it possible? Could you go in and?
Under comprehension, yes, it's possible. In terms of speaking, I kind of, I haven't spoken it for a long time, so it's got a bit rusty.
We'll take one more last question in the middle there. Sorry for everyone. We've run out of time, but it's lovely questions.
Hi, it's Will here. I was wondering, you spoke about how little you got to pack for the mission. I was wondering if there's anything you really wished you didn't pack. Or conversely, if there's anything you
We've reached
used
a real
all the
high
time.
point here with the packing question. It's a very British way of doing things, isn't
Something
it?
I wish.
So what wish? Let's go both ways. What did you wish you didn't have? So that what was the Tux T-shirt that wasn't used? And what thing, if you pack your bag again, which you may have a chance, what would you say? I've got to bring that.
Do you know there wasn't anything that I wish I hadn't taken, because you don't get much room, and so everything had a lot of thought into it, and everything was used, and it was some of the great things were taking T-shirts for the charities and the education programs that I can now give back to people and say, it's flown in space, which has been brilliant. So there's nothing I can think of that wasn't used. In terms of what would I take again, gosh, you just have to think about the mission and plan it again so carefully in terms of what you wanted to do now and what you wanted to have up there. But that problem is something that to a large degree it's taken away from us, because there are so many things you can't take up in terms of you're not allowed electrical equipment,
your teddy bear, whatever whatever your personal token is, something from the kids or something. That can't go in the bag, can it? Or?
Yes, you are allowed to take a few pieces of personal equipment like that. Yeah. Okay. So my wife really surprised me. Actually, my boys both have a little blanket that they have, and she cut a corner off of them, one each. So that was quite nice, a nice touch to have up there. So you're allowed a few small personal things in there, but not much.
There you go. Wonderful. Tim, that was an absolute pleasure and a real privilege to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much.
So those that don't know me, I'm the Deputy President of the IET, and it's for me to thank Tim for a fantastic insight into his mission, and also for the inspiration that he must have given millions and millions of people to be our next generation of engineers. So I know you've applauded once, please applaud again. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Tim Davey for the fantastic chairing of the presentation. It really drilled into issues that you wouldn't normally get into without having that sort of format, so that was brilliant. Hannah Scott for the producing, thank you very much. Dallas Campbell for the Sawyer's sound recording. I don't know whether he's here, but thank you for that. Savoy Place, of course, for hosting. And the drinks reception, which is hosted by Akamai, is out at the back, so look forward to that and meeting you all out there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.